Germany's relentless push for Eurozone-wide austerity is driving the global economy towards catastrophe, so says the British Shadow Chancellor, or opposition finance spokesman, Ed Balls, who argues that someone's got to persuade Berlin to change course. Well, to discuss this in more detail, I'm joined live now by James Meadway. He's senior economist at the New Economics Foundation think tank there in London. So why is the British Shadow Chancellor so sure that Germany, the country least affected by debt troubles, is wrong on how to deal with EU's debt crisis?
Well, I think in this case, Ed Balls knows his history and he knows his economics, that if you drive a weak economy, and Europe is, a collection of weak economies, if you drive a weak economy into greater and greater austerity, you don't make the economy stronger, you make it weaker still. You suck demand out of that economy. It means markets start to collapse. It means firms sell less goods. And if firms sell less goods, it means they employ less people, they pay people less, and you set up a vicious spiral of decline. Now, really, this is one of the mechanisms that helped drive the Great Depression in the 1930s. For Germany to be insisting on austerity now is leading only to stagnation inside Europe. It's making the crisis much worse than it needs to be.
At the recent G8 summit, David Cameron said that the Greeks should choose the fate themselves, which seemed to differ somewhat from the opinions of other G8 leaders who urged it to stay on in the Eurozone. Why are we seeing such a difference there?
Well, I think what's happening is that there's a debate breaking out amongst the rest of Europe, and particularly Europe's rulers, about whether Greece should stay inside the euro or not, whether the costs of it being inside outweigh the benefits of potentially seeing an exit at some point. And Cameron, of course, is something of a reflection of that. Having said that, I do think Cameron's now joining a chorus of various European leaders who've been very keen to wag their fingers at Greece. Everybody from Angela Merkel downwards has been doing this for the last few months, nearly 2 years now. And really, this is a decision for Greek people to take themselves in the upcoming elections. What kind of society, what kind of economy they want is what they'll be voting on. And that's something they need to decide without anybody else sticking their noses in, rather. Well,
you said last year that a second Greek bailout would end in default. Do you think it will? And if so, why didn't EU leaders see this coming?
Well, there's two parts of that. The first one is that there's been a partial default in Greece already. This is the debt swap deal arranged earlier this year, where some of Greece's debt was written off after a rather tortuous negotiation. What you're looking at, unfortunately, is that that deal did not write off nearly enough of Greece's debt for it to genuinely be able to recover. You're still looking, even at the really grossly optimistic projections that were offered at the time of the debt swap deal by the EU, at 120% of GDP being taken up with debt by 2020, I think, is the end date for it. So you're still looking at a very, very large debt. Because you haven't written off the debt, or enough of the debt, Greece will still almost certainly have to default at some point in the future. And because austerity is damaging the economy, this is an economy that's now shrunk by approaching 20% by the end of this year over the last 4 or 5 years. Because the economy is shrinking, that debt burden is getting worse and worse. So I think we're looking at potentially another Greek default, perhaps much more disorderly default, in the fairly near future.
Well, austerity has led to social unrest, of course, in Greece. We've just been talking about Greece there, and in other countries. Huge demonstrations in Spain that's helped topple leaders, including Berlusconi and, of course, Sarkozy. What, James, is the long-term social and political impact of a policy of this relentless austerity that we're seeing at the moment in Europe?
Well, you can certainly see the short-term impact already. If you take the social impact in Greece, it's absolutely catastrophic. Greece used to have one of the lowest suicide rates in Europe. Suicide rates there have risen by 40% over the last year. You can see the social impact from one end of the continent to the other. But it's the long-term economic impact that starts to get worrying. There are no realistic prospects for recovery inside Europe, and certainly inside the Eurozone, for as long as austerity is in place. If there's going to be any chance of Europe recovering, austerity has to end. So that means a reverse of pretty much everything governments are doing now, and start to say, look, we need to increase demand in the economy, we should be spending money, we should be creating jobs. That's the kind of policy that might start to see a recovery in Europe.
And that, of course, goes everything against what Germany's advocating, obviously still pushing ahead the austerity measures. And yet we are seeing this call for growth. Is it a question now we're seeing Germany, although being the strongest economy in Europe, perhaps being ignored or even isolated over this matter?
Well, that could easily start to happen just over the next few weeks even. Clearly Hollande and Merkel are due to be meeting up on Wednesday this week to discuss, a way forward out of the crisis, or at least that's the plan for this thing. I suspect what will happen is that you'll start to see increasing a logjam or a deadlock at the centre of Europe with no clear agreement on what exactly should be done next. And at the same time, when you look not just at Greece but now at Spain, where the banking system is in a very serious state, a developing crisis, and no political leadership on how to get out of it. No political leadership, at least from the European institutions.
James, great to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for your time. James Meadway, senior economist at the New Economics Foundation think tank there in London.